The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the Mountain View Resort. As I watched my bride of exactly 47 minutes press her lips against Ryan Carter's mouth behind the reception hall's ornate pillars, the sound of crystal breaking seemed to echo louder than the wedding band playing our supposed first dance song just 20 feet away. 200 guests continued their celebration, completely oblivious to the fact that the groom was standing, frozen in the shadows, watching his new wife destroy everything we'd built together in a single, devastating moment. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just stood there as Jessica's white silk dress pressed against Ryan's charcoal gray suit, her perfectly manicured fingers tangled in his dark hair the same way they'd been in mine during our first kiss 3 years ago at Red Rocks Amphitheatre. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was now creating new memories in the same passionate way. It's just with a different man, on what was supposed to be the most important day of our lives. The morning had started like something out of a romantic movie. Jessica had insisted we spend the night apart, honoring the old tradition about the groom not seeing the bride before the ceremony. I'd stayed at the Highlands District loft we'd been renovating together, while she remained at her family's Cherry Creek mansion with her bridesmaids. She'd sent me a text at sunrise that simply read, "Today we become forever. Mike, I love you more than the Colorado mountains. Love the sky." I should have known something was wrong when I tried calling her around 10 that morning, and Amanda Wilson, her maid of honor, answered Jessica's phone with a nervous laugh. "Oh, she's in the shower, Mike. Oh, you know how long Jess takes to get ready. Don't worry. She'll be the most beautiful bride Denver has ever seen." The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me with an uneasy feeling I couldn't quite shake. My business partner Robert Chen had picked me up in his Tesla, insisting that today was about celebration, not the quarterly reports we'd been reviewing all week for Thompson and Chen Marketing Agency. "Dude, you're about to marry the woman of your dreams. Stop checking your phone every 5 seconds and enjoy this moment." He was right, of course. Jessica and I had built something beautiful together over the past 3 years. She'd been there when I'd taken the leap from corporate marketing to starting my own agency. She'd held my hand through the sleepless nights when we weren't sure if we'd make payroll. And she'd been the first person I'd called when we landed our breakthrough client, a tech startup that had just gone public. The Mountain View Resort looked absolutely stunning as we pulled up the winding drive. Jessica had spent months planning every detail, from the white roses cascading down the stone archway to the string quartet positioned perfectly to catch the morning light filtering through the aspens. She'd always had an eye for beauty, which is probably why our marketing campaigns had been so successful. Her background in visual design combined with my strategic planning had made Thompson and Chen one of Denver's fastest-growing agencies. My groomsmen were already assembled in the bridal suite, a collection of college friends and business associates who'd become family over the years. David Reynolds, Jessica's older brother, was adjusting his tie in the mirror when I walked in. There's the man of the hour, ready to officially become my brother-in-law. He clapped me on the shoulder with the same enthusiasm he'd shown when Jessica first brought me home for Thanksgiving 2 years ago. David had been skeptical at first, protective of his younger sister, but he'd warmed up quickly when he saw how Jessica lit up around me. The ceremony itself was flawless. Jessica walked down the aisle in her grandmother's vintage lace dress. It's modified with contemporary touches that made her look like she'd stepped out of a bridal magazine. Her dark hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, with small white roses tucked behind her ear. When our eyes met, she smiled that radiant smile that had first caught my attention at a networking event downtown 3 years ago. I remembered thinking then that she was the most genuine person I'd ever met, someone who could light up a room just by walking into it. "Do you, Michael James Thompson, take Jessica Marie Reynolds to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part?" The minister's words carried across the outdoor ceremony space, backed by the stunning view of the Rocky Mountains that Jessica had specifically requested. She'd said she wanted our love to be witnessed by something eternal and unchanging. "I do," I said, meaning every word. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as I slipped the platinum band onto her finger, the same ring we'd chosen together during a weekend trip to Vail 6 months ago. Do you, Jessica Marie Reynolds, take Michael James Thompson to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do, she whispered, her voice carrying just far enough for the first few rows to hear. When she placed my ring on my finger, her hands were trembling slightly, which I attributed to wedding day nerves. Everyone had told us that even the most confident people got emotional during their vows. By the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was perfect, soft and sweet, with just enough passion to make the crowd cheer. Jessica's lips tasted like the vanilla lip gloss she'd been wearing since our second date, familiar and comforting. When we broke apart, she rested her forehead against mine for just a moment and whispered, "We did it, Mike. We're really married." The reception transition was seamless, exactly as Jessica had choreographed during our rehearsal dinner the night before. Guests moved from the ceremony space to the indoor reception hall while we took photos with both families. Jessica's parents, who had initially been concerned about her marrying someone from a middle-class background, had come around completely when they saw how successful the agency had become. My own parents, who'd driven up from Colorado Springs, were practically glowing with pride as they posed for pictures with their new daughter-in-law. "I still can't believe our little Mikey is married," my mother said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Jessica, you take good care of our boy. He's got a good heart, but he works too much. Don't worry, Mrs. Thompson. I plan to make sure. He takes more vacations." Jessica laughed, squeezing my hand. "In fact, we're thinking about taking a month off next year to travel through Europe. Mike's never been to Italy, and I've been dying to show him Rome." It was during the cocktail hour that I first noticed Ryan Carter had arrived. I hadn't seen him since college, and frankly, I was surprised Jessica had invited him. They'd dated briefly during our sophomore year, nothing serious, but it had ended awkwardly when Ryan had transferred to a school in California. I'd mentioned him to Jessica once or twice over the years, usually in the context of funny college stories, but I hadn't thought about him in months. "Mike, congratulations, man." Ryan approached me near the bar, looking exactly like I remembered him. Just with more expensive clothes and a confidence that comes from success, Jessica told me, "You started your own marketing firm." "That's incredible. I'm actually in digital strategy now myself, working with some startups in the Bay Area. Thanks for coming, Ryan. I have to admit I was a little surprised to see your name on the guest list." I accepted his handshake, noting that his grip was firm but not aggressive. He seemed genuinely happy to be there. "Yeah, Jessica and I reconnected on social media a few months ago. She mentioned the wedding, and I happened to be in town for a conference this week. Figured I'd stop by and congratulate you both." "You landed a good one, Mike." Jessica was always special. Something about the way he said special made me glance around the room looking for my new wife. I spotted her near the head table, talking animatedly with Amanda and 2 other bridesmaids. She looked radiant, exactly like every bride should look on her wedding day. When she caught my eye across the room, she blew me a kiss and pointed to her watch, reminding me that we needed to start the formal reception activities soon. The dinner service went perfectly. Jessica had chosen a menu that reflected both of our personalities: Colorado lamb for the main course, representing my love for local cuisine, and a deconstructed tiramisu for dessert, honoring her Italian heritage. During the toasts, David spoke about how Jessica had always been the dreamer in their family, the one who believed in fairy tale endings and true love. Amanda shared stories about late-night phone calls where Jessica would gush about me, describing me as the one who finally gets her. My best man, Tommy Martinez, told the story of how I'd known Jessica was the one after our 3rd date. When she'd shown up at my apartment with homemade soup after I'd mentioned having a cold. "This guy called me at 11 at night just to say, 'I think I'm going to marry her, Tommy.' She brought soup, but more than that, she actually listened when I was talking. And here we are, 3 years later, and Mike was absolutely right. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and looked out at the room full of people who'd supported our relationship from the beginning. 3 years ago, I met a woman who challenged me to be better than I thought I could be. Jessica didn't just fall in love with who I was. She saw who I could become. She believed in my dreams before I did, and she's been my partner in every sense of the word. Today isn't just about promising to love each other forever. It's about acknowledging that we've been building this life together all along, and now it's official. Jessica's eyes filled with tears again as I raised my glass. To my wife, Jessica Thompson, thank you for making me believe in forever. The applause was thunderous, and Jessica stood up to kiss me as everyone cheered. It was one of those perfect moments that you want to freeze in time, surrounded by love and support in the absolute certainty that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The dancing started immediately after dinner. Our first dance was to At Last by Etta James, song we'd chosen because Jessica said it perfectly captured how she felt when we met. I'd dated a lot of guys, Mike, but with you, it finally felt right. Like everything before was just practice for the real thing. As we swayed together in the center of the dance floor, Jessica whispered in my ear, "I can't believe we pulled this off. Everything is absolutely perfect." "You're perfect," I whispered, back, spinning her gently so her dress flowed around her like something out of a movie. "I love you, Mrs. Thompson. I love you too, Mr. Thompson, forever and always." After our dance, the floor opened up to everyone else. I spent the next hour making the rounds, thanking guests for coming, sharing stories with old friends, and basking in the glow of what felt like the best day of my life. Jessica was doing the same on the other side of the room, and occasionally our eyes would meet across the crowd. She'd smile and mouth "I love you," and I'd feel that same flutter in my chest that I'd felt on our very first date. It was around 9:30 when I realized I hadn't seen Jessica for about 20 minutes. The band had just finished playing Sweet Caroline, and everyone was calling for the couple to come back to the dance floor. I scanned the room, expecting to find her refreshing her makeup or talking with relatives, but she was nowhere to be seen. "Have you seen Jess?" I asked Amanda, who was standing near the bar with a group of college friends. "Oh, she said she needed some air. I think she stepped out onto the terrace for a minute. You know how hot it gets in here with all these people?" Amanda's smile seemed forced, and she avoided making direct eye contact with me. "She'll be right back, Mike. Don't worry." But something in her tone made me worry. I headed toward the terrace doors, nodding and smiling at guests who tried to stop me for conversations. The terrace was empty except for a few older relatives who were taking a break from the dancing. I checked the outdoor bar area, then walked around to the side of the building where there were additional seating areas and decorative gardens. That's when I heard Jessica's laugh, the same musical sound that had first attracted me to her at that networking event. It was coming from behind the stone pillars that supported the covered walkway connecting the reception hall to the resort's main building. I walked toward the sound, expecting to find her talking with friends or family members who needed a quiet place to catch up. Instead, I found my wife of less than an hour in the arms of another man, kissing him with the same passion she'd shown me during our honeymoon preview last weekend. Ryan's hands were in her hair, messing up the perfect chignon that had taken her stylist 2 hours to create. Jessica's arms were wrapped around his neck, and she was making small sounds of pleasure that I recognized because they were the same sounds she made when we were intimate. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, creating the crash that should have separated them immediately. Instead, they broke apart slowly, Jessica's eyes finding mine over Ryan's shoulder. For a moment, all three of us stood frozen in a tableau that would be burned into my memory forever. Jessica's lipstick was smeared, her dress slightly wrinkled from being pressed against Ryan's suit. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ryan looked like he'd been caught stealing from a church collection plate, guilty and horrified and slightly defiant all at once. "Mike," Jessica breathed, her hand flying to her mouth as if she could somehow take back what I'd just witnessed. "This isn't? I can explain." But I didn't want an explanation. Not yet. Not while 200 people were inside celebrating our marriage, completely unaware that the fairy tale had just turned into a nightmare. I looked at Jessica's face, searching for some sign that this was a mistake, a moment of wedding day stress. That had gotten out of hand. Instead, I saw guilt and something else that looked almost like relief, as if she'd been waiting for this moment to happen. How long? I asked quietly, my voice surprisingly steady, given that my entire world had just shifted off its axis. Jessica and Ryan exchanged a glance that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a spontaneous moment of weakness. This was something that had been happening for a while, something they'd planned and executed right under my nose on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. "Mike, please, let me explain," Jessica started, stepping toward me with her hands outstretched. "It's complicated." "No," I said, taking a step backward. "It's actually very simple. You kissed another man at our wedding. After you promised to love, honor, and cherish me for the rest of your life. After 3 years of building a life together. After planning this perfect day for months." I could hear my voice getting louder, and I forced myself to lower it. "It's the simplest thing in the world, Jessica. You chose him over me." "That's not true," she said desperately. "I love you, Mike. I do. But Ryan and I, we have history. And when he came back into my life—" "When did he come back into your life?" I interrupted. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Ryan cleared his throat. "We've been in touch for about 6 months," he said quietly. "Since Jessica reached out after she saw I was back in Denver for work. 6 months. They'd been reconnecting for 6 months, which meant this had been going on for the entire duration of our engagement. Every conversation about wedding plans, every intimate moment we'd shared, every time she'd told me she loved me, she'd been hiding this relationship with Ryan. 6 months, I repeated, more to myself than to them. So when we were tasting wedding cakes and picking out flowers and choosing our honeymoon destination, you were." "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face now. "I tried to end it with Ryan. I really did. But I couldn't stop thinking about him and when he said he was coming to the wedding." "You invited him," I said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "I wondered why his name was on the guest list. You invited your lover to our wedding." The word lover hung in the air between us like an accusation. Jessica flinched as if I'd slapped her, but she didn't deny it. "I'm sorry, Mike," Ryan said, and he actually did sound sorry. "I never meant for it to happen this way. I should have stayed away." "Yes," I agreed. "You should have, but you didn't. And Jessica, you should have been honest with me months ago instead of standing at an altar and lying to my face in front of everyone we care about." I turned and walked back toward the reception hall, leaving them standing in the shadows behind the pillars. I could hear Jessica calling my name, but I didn't stop. I needed to think, to process what I'd just discovered, to figure out what came next. The party was still in full swing when I walked back inside. The band was playing September by Earth, Wind and Fire. The dance floor was packed with guests having the time of their lives. My parents were dancing together near the edge of the crowd, looking like teenagers again. David Reynolds was at the bar, laughing at something one of his friends had said. Amanda was surrounded by bridesmaids, all of them taking selfies and posting them to social media with hashtags about love and happiness and perfect weddings. None of them knew that the groom had just discovered his bride cheating on him behind the stone pillars. None of them knew that the perfect wedding they were celebrating was built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. They were all living in the same beautiful illusion that I'd been living in just 10 minutes ago, before my world had completely collapsed. I stood there watching them, these people who loved us and had come here to celebrate our happiness, and I realized that I had a choice to make. I could walk back outside, confront Jessica and Ryan again, demand explanations and apologies and promises that things would be different. I could cause a scene, tell everyone what had happened, turn this perfect day into a public spectacle of humiliation and heartbreak. Or I could do something else entirely. I walked over to the bandleader and whispered something in his ear. He nodded and waited for the current song to end before taking the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment. The groom would like to say something." The crowd turned toward me expectantly, their faces full of love and happiness and anticipation. My parents moved closer to the stage, beaming with pride. David raised his glass, ready for another toast. Amanda looked around the room, probably wondering where Jessica was, but not yet concerned enough to interrupt the moment. I took the microphone and looked out at all these people who had taken time out of their lives to be here for us. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate what Jessica and I thought was going to be the beginning of our forever. Began. Unfortunately, I've just discovered that my new wife has been having an affair for the past 6 months with someone who's here tonight as our guest. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the mountain wind rustling through the aspen trees outside. Someone dropped a glass in the back of the room. A few people gasped. Most just stared at me in shock, trying to process what I'd. Jess said, I want you all to know that this party has been paid for. The bar is open all night. The band has been asked to keep playing until midnight as planned. Please, stay and enjoy yourselves. Celebrate love, even if ours didn't work out the way we hoped. I handed the microphone back to the band leader and walked toward the exit, past faces frozen in disbelief and confusion. I could hear murmurs. Starting behind me, voices asking each other what had just happened, whether this was some kind of joke or mistake. Jessica was standing just inside the doorway, having obviously rushed back inside when she heard the music stop. Her face was pale, her lipstick hastily reapplied, her hair slightly disheveled despite her attempts to fix it. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman who had just been caught destroying her marriage on her wedding day. Mike, please, she said, reaching for my arm as I approached. Don't do this. We can work through this. I made a mistake, but we can fix it. I stopped and looked at her. This woman I'd loved completely for 3 years. This woman I'd planned to spend the rest of my life with. This woman who had just shattered every dream we'd built together. Jessica, I said quietly, so only she could hear me. You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. I've been making the same choice for 6 months, so now I'm making mine. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the small gift I'd planned to give her during our last dance of the evening. It was a key to the house we'd been looking at in Cherry Creek, the one she'd fallen in love with during our house hunting trips. I'd put an offer on it 2 weeks ago as a surprise. I was planning to tell her tonight that we could start looking for furniture as soon as we got back from our honeymoon. This was going to be my surprise for you, I said, placing the key in her palm. Instead, I'm giving you a different kind of surprise. I'm walking away, Jessica. From you, from this marriage, from everything we built together. You can have Ryan. And you can have the life you apparently really wanted all along. I could see Ryan standing near the bar, looking like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw something that might have been regret, or guilt, or maybe just fear about what came next. I walked over to him. Past guests, who were still trying to figure out what was happening, past my parents who looked like they'd been hit by a truck, past David who was staring at his sister with a combination of shock and anger that I'd never seen on his face before. Ryan, I said when I reached him, congratulations. You won. He opened his mouth to say something, but I held up my hand to stop him. Take care of her, I continued. She's going to need someone to help her figure out how to explain this to 200 people. She's going to need someone to help her deal with the fallout from destroying her marriage on her wedding day. She's going to need someone to help her figure out how to move forward from here. I paused, looking back at Jessica, who was standing frozen by the door with tears streaming down her face and my house key clutched in her hand. Mostly, she's going to need someone who can live with the fact that she's capable of doing what she just did. Good luck with that. I walked out of the Mountain View Resort and into the Colorado night, leaving behind my wife of 1 hour, my wedding reception, my marriage, and the life I'd thought we were going to build together. The mountain air was cool and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I'd just left behind. I pulled out my phone and called a cab, then sat on a bench outside the resort entrance to wait. Behind me, I could hear the band starting to play again, probably at the bandleader's insistence that they follow my instructions to keep the party going. Some guests were likely leaving, but others would stay, drawn by the surreal nature of what had just happened in the open bar I'd insisted they continued to enjoy. As I sat there waiting for my ride, I thought about the conversation Jessica and I had had just last week about our 5-year plan. We'd talked about expanding the agency, maybe opening a second location in Boulder. We'd discussed when we might want to start trying for children, settling on waiting 2 years so we could travel and establish ourselves more firmly in our careers. We'd even talked about what we'd name our kids, agreeing that we both loved traditional names with modern nicknames. All of that was gone now, erased by a single kiss behind a stone pillar at our own wedding reception. But as I sat there in the mountain air, watching the stars emerge in the clear Colorado sky, I realized something. Unexpected, I felt relief, not happiness, certainly not joy, but a strange sense of lightness that I hadn't felt in months. Maybe some part of me had known that something was wrong. Maybe that's why I'd been working longer hours at the agency, throwing myself into new client pitches and strategic planning sessions that kept me at the office until late in the evening. Maybe that's why I'd been so focused on the business side of our wedding planning, leaving most of the emotional details to Jessica. Maybe some unconscious part of my brain had been preparing for this moment without me realizing it. The cab pulled up just as my phone started ringing. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, along with a photo of her from our engagement shoot last fall. She was laughing in the picture, looking directly at the camera with genuine joy and love in her eyes. Or what I'd thought was genuine joy and love. Now I wondered if she'd been thinking about Ryan even then, comparing me to him, wishing she was somewhere else, with someone else. I declined the call and got into the cab. "Where to?" the driver asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. He'd probably picked up plenty of wedding guests over the years, but I doubted he'd ever had a groom leave his own reception alone an hour after the ceremony. "Downtown Denver?" I said. The Thompson and Chen building on 17th Street. Was going back to work, the one place that had always made sense to me, the one thing I'd built that was entirely my own. Tomorrow I'd have to figure out how to untangle my life from Jessica's, how to divide our assets and our shared dreams and our mutual friends. I'd have to decide whether to keep the agency or sell my half to Robert and start over somewhere else. I'd have to learn how to be single again after 3 years of being part of a couple. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in my office and look out at the Denver skyline and think about what came next. Tonight, I wanted to process the fact that the woman I'd loved completely had been living a double life for half our engagement. Tonight, I wanted to figure out how I'd missed the signs that my marriage was over before it had even really begun. As the cab wound its way down the mountain toward the city lights below, my phone buzzed with text messages. Some were from wedding guests asking what had happened. Others were from friends who'd seen posts on social media and were trying to figure out if this was real or some kind of elaborate joke. One was from my sister Susan, who lived in Seattle and had flown in just for the wedding. "Mike, what the hell happened? Mom and Dad are worried sick. Call me when you can." But the message that stopped me cold was from Jessica. "Mike, I know you hate me right now, and you have every right to. But please don't throw away 3 years over one mistake. I love you. I've always loved you. Ryan was just... he was the past. You're my future. We can fix this if you'll let me try." I stared at that message for a long time, watching the city lights get brighter as we descended into Denver. Part of me wanted to believe that this really had been just one mistake, one moment of weakness that had gotten out of hand. Me wanted to go back to the resort, take Jessica in my arms, and pretend that the last hour had never happened. But 6 months wasn't one mistake. 6 months was a choice, made over and over again, to build something with Ryan while planning a wedding with me. 6 months was a sustained deception that called into question everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married. Typed back a single word: no. Then I turned off my phone and watched the Colorado landscape roll past the cab window, carrying me away from my wedding day and toward whatever came next. The Thompson and Chen building was eerily quiet at 11:30 on a Saturday night. Nothing like the bustling energy it usually held during business hours. I used my keycard to access the elevator, watching the floors tick by as I rose to our suite on the 15th floor. The city sparkled below through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a sea of lights that somehow made me feel both connected to and completely isolated from the world around me. My office still smelled faintly of the celebratory champagne Robert and I had shared on Friday afternoon, toasting what we'd thought would be the perfect weekend. There were congratulatory cards scattered across my desk from clients and colleagues, floral arrangements that had arrived throughout the week, and a bottle of Dom Perignon from our biggest account, with a note that read, "To Michael and Jessica May. Your partnership be as successful as ours has been." I loosened my bow tie and sat down in my leather chair. Staring at the framed photo on my desk from our engagement party 8 months ago, Jessica was wearing the blue dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion, the one that brought out her eyes and made her look like something out of a magazine. We were both laughing at something David had said during his impromptu toast, our faces glowing with happiness and anticipation for the future we were planning together. Now, I couldn't look at that photo without wondering if she'd already been in contact with Ryan by then. Had she been thinking about him while she smiled for the camera? Had she been comparing me to him even as we celebrated our engagement with friends and family? My computer chimed with an email notification. Breaking. Through the silence of the empty office, without thinking, I clicked on my inbox, expecting to see the usual weekend spam, or perhaps a message from a client who didn't understand the concept of work-life balance. Instead, I found myself staring at an email from an address I didn't recognize. rcarterstrategies@gmail.com. The subject line read, "We need to talk." I hesitated for a moment before opening it, knowing that whatever Ryan had to say would only make this situation more complicated. But curiosity won out over caution, and I clicked on the message. "Mike, I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but I feel like I owe you an explanation. What happened tonight wasn't supposed to happen. I came to Denver for business, and when Jessica mentioned the wedding, I thought I could handle seeing her again. I was wrong. Oh no. That doesn't excuse anything, but I wanted you to know that this wasn't some calculated plan to ruin your marriage. I'm flying back to San Francisco tomorrow morning, and I won't contact Jessica again. She loves you, Mike. Whatever this thing was between us, it was about the past, not the future. Don't throw away what you two have built over something that's already over, Ryan." I read the email 3 times, each reading making me angrier than the last. The casual way he dismissed 6 months of deception as something that's already over. The presumption that he could somehow absolve himself by claiming it wasn't calculated, as if that made the betrayal any less devastating. The audacity of telling me not to throw away what Jessica and I had built, when he'd been actively participating in tearing it down for half a year. But what bothered me most was his claim that Jessica loved me. She loved me, how could she have maintained a relationship with him throughout our entire engagement? If she loved me, how could she have stood at an altar and promised to forsake all others while knowing she'd been emotionally and physically involved with another man? If she loved me, how could she have invited him to our wedding and then kissed him during our reception? I was about to delete the email when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a single photo, Jessica and Ryan at what looked like a coffee shop, their heads bent close together in intimate conversation. The timestamp showed it was taken 3 weeks ago, right around the time Jessica had told me she needed to spend a Saturday afternoon with Amanda to finalize the seating arrangements for the reception. Second message followed immediately. "There are more where this came from. Thought you should know what you're really dealing with before you make any decisions about forgiveness. A friend." My hands trembled slightly as I stared at the photo. Jessica was wearing the green sweater I'd bought her for Christmas, the one she'd said made her feel beautiful and confident. She was laughing at something Ryan had said. Her face lit up with the same expression of joy and connection that I'd thought was reserved for our relationship. They looked comfortable together, familiar, like a couple who'd been together for years, rather than two people supposedly struggling with an unwanted attraction. Wow. I forwarded the photo to my personal email, then deleted the messages from my phone. Whoever had sent them was right about one thing. I needed to know what I was really dealing with before I could make any decisions about what came next. The elevator chimed in the distance, indicating that someone else had entered the building. At this hour on a Saturday night, it could only be security making rounds, or possibly Robert, who sometimes came in on weekends when he couldn't sleep. But the footsteps I heard in the hallway were too light to be either of those options, and they were heading directly toward our suite. Jessica appeared in my doorway moments later, still wearing her wedding dress, but looking nothing like the radiant bride she'd been just hours earlier. Her makeup was smeared from crying, her hair had completely fallen out of its elegant updo, and there were grass stains on the bottom of her dress from what must have been A hasty walk across the resort grounds to wherever she'd parked her car. "How did you get up here?" I asked, not moving from my chair. "I still have my keycard," she said quietly. "I know you probably don't want to see me, but I couldn't let you leave things the way we did. We need to talk about this, Mike. We need to figure out how to move forward." "There is no moving forward, Jessica. Oh, there's no us anymore. You made sure of that when you decided to have an affair with Ryan for 6 months while planning our wedding." She stepped into my office uninvited, closing the door behind her. "It wasn't an affair, not really. We're just talking at first, catching up on old times. It didn't become anything physical until recently, and even then, it was just a few kisses, nothing more serious than what you saw tonight." "Just a few kisses," I repeated, pulling up the photo on my computer screen and turning the monitor toward her. "Is this what just talking looks like to you?" Jessica's face went pale as she recognized the image. "Where did you get that?" "Someone who apparently knows more about your relationship with Ryan than I do sent it to me about 10 minutes ago. They mentioned there are more photos. Care to explain what other just talking I might be seeing soon?" She sank into the chair across from my desk, her wedding dress pooling around her like a white silk accusation. "Mike, I know how this looks, but you have to understand the situation I was in. When Ryan contacted me 6 months ago, I told him I was engaged. I told him I was happy with you. But he said he'd never gotten over me, that seeing my engagement announcement on social media had made him realize he'd made the biggest mistake of his life when he let me go in college. So you decided to explore that possibility while maintaining our engagement." "No," she said emphatically. "I told him it was too late, that I was with you and planning a future with you. But he kept reaching out, sending messages about how we'd never really had closure, how he'd always wondered what might have been if circumstances had been different. Eventually, I agreed to meet him for coffee, just to give him that closure and hopefully end the contact. But it didn't end the contact." "No," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It made everything more complicated. Being with him brought back all these memories from college, all these feelings I thought I'd moved past. He reminded me of who I used to be before I became so focused on career and planning and being the perfect partner for you." And walked to the window, looking out at the city lights while trying to process what she was telling me. "So this is my fault somehow? I made you feel like you couldn't be yourself?" "That's not what I'm saying," she said quickly. "You never made me feel like anything other than loved and supported. But with Ryan, I remembered what it felt like to be spontaneous, to make decisions based on emotion instead of logic, to feel that kind of intense, unpredictable attraction that doesn't make sense, but feels incredible. And that was worth risking our entire relationship? I never meant for it to go as far as it did," she said, standing up and moving closer to where I stood by the window. "I kept telling myself I would end it, that I would choose you and our future together. But every time I tried to cut off contact with Ryan, he would say something that made me remember why I'd fallen for him in the first place." I turned to face her, studying the woman I'd thought I knew completely. "You're talking about Ryan like he's some irresistible force of nature that you had no choice but to surrender to. But you did have a choice, Jessica. Every text message, every phone call, every secret meeting, those were all choices you made." "You're right," she said, tears streaming down her face again. "They were choices, and they were wrong choices. But Mike, I chose you in the end. I married you today because I realized that what Ryan and I had was just nostalgia and fantasy. What you and I have is real and solid and worth fighting for. You married me today because you'd already sent out the invitations and booked the venue and invited 200 people to celebrate our love. You married me today because calling off the wedding would have been complicated and embarrassing. You didn't marry me because you chose me over Ryan. You married me despite not being able to choose." The truth of that statement hung in the air between us like a challenge. Jessica opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again, seeming to realize that anything she said would only confirm what I'd just articulated. "The photo I showed you was taken 3 weeks ago," I continued. 3 weeks ago, you were still meeting with him, still exploring whatever this connection is that you can't seem to resist. So tell me, Jessica, when exactly did you decide you wanted to be married to me? Was it before or after you kissed him in front of our wedding guests tonight?" "I made a mistake," she said desperately. A huge, terrible mistake that I'll regret for the rest of my life. But people make mistakes, Mike. Even people who love each other make mistakes. Can't we find a way to work through this? I walked back to my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulling out a bottle of whiskey that Robert and I kept for particularly stressful days with difficult clients. I poured myself a glass, noting that my hands were steadier than they'd been an hour ago. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold clarity that I found oddly comforting. Jessica, what you did wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern of behavior that lasted for 6 months. You didn't accidentally fall into an emotional affair with your ex-boyfriend. You didn't accidentally invite him to our wedding. You didn't accidentally kiss him during our reception. Those were deliberate choices made over and over again. Choices that prioritized your feelings and desires over our relationship and my trust. I took a sip of the whiskey, feeling the burn of it down my throat. But here's what I think really happened. I think you genuinely do have feelings for both of us. I think you found yourself in the impossible position of loving to people and not knowing how to choose between us. I think you thought you could somehow have both maintain the security and stability of our relationship while exploring the passion and excitement of your connection with Ryan. Jessica stared at me with something that looked like surprise. That's actually pretty close to how it felt. Like I was torn between two different versions of myself and couldn't figure out which one was real. The problem is that you made that choice without involving me in the decision. You decided to explore your feelings for Ryan while letting me plan a wedding and a future based on the assumption that I was the only man in your life. You let me invest emotionally and financially in a marriage that you weren't sure you wanted. I wanted it, she insisted. I want it. Mike, I know I handled this terribly, but I do want to be married to you. I want the life we planned together. Do you? I asked, genuinely curious. Or do you want the idea of that life? From where I'm sitting, it looks like what you really want is to not have to choose. You want to be married to me for all the practical reasons we work well together? We've built something successful. We make sense on paper. But you want to keep Ryan in your life for all the emotional reasons, the passion, the excitement, the feeling of being swept away by something beyond your control? Jessica was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but determined. What if that's true? What if I do have feelings for both of you? Does that automatically mean our marriage is over? Can't we find a way to work through this together? Work through it how? I asked. Are you suggesting some kind of arrangement where I share you with Ryan? Are you planning to see him occasionally when you need to feel passionate and spontaneous, then come home to me when you want stability and companionship? No, she said quickly. I would end things with Ryan completely. I would never see him or speak to him again. I would commit fully to our marriage and do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust. And what happens the next time someone comes along who makes you feel the way Ryan does? What happens when you meet someone who reminds you of a different version of yourself, someone who makes you question whether you're really happy in our marriage? She didn't have an answer for that, which was answer enough. I finished my whiskey and set the glass down on my desk with a definitive clink. Jessica, I think you're a good person who found herself in a complicated situation and made some terrible choices. I don't think you set out to hurt me or destroy our relationship. I think you genuinely believed you could manage your feelings for both of us without anyone getting hurt. Then why can't we try to fix this? She asked plaintively. Because the foundation of trust that a marriage needs to survive has been completely destroyed. Not just by the affair, but by the lies that made it possible. Every time you told me you loved me over the past 6 months, I have to wonder if you were thinking about Ryan. Every time you said you couldn't wait to be my wife, I have to question whether you meant it or whether you were trying to convince yourself it was true. I stood up and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet away from where she sat. More importantly, I deserve to be with someone who chooses me completely. It's not someone who settles for me after exploring other options. I deserve to be someone's first choice, not their practical choice. You are my first choice, she said, standing up to face me, like you have to believe that. Yes, I was confused for a while. Yes, I made terrible decisions, but in the end, I chose you. I married you. No, Jessica. You married me because you ran out of time to make a real choice. You married me because the wedding was planned and paid for and all our friends and family were there expecting it to happen. If Ryan had asked you to leave with him tonight instead of just kissing you, what would you have done? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mentally working through the scenario, imagining what she would have done if forced to make an immediate, irreversible choice between us. I would have stayed with you, she said. Finally, but there was uncertainty in her voice that told me she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Would you? I asked gently. Or would you have been tempted to finally find out what a life with Ryan could look like? She didn't answer, which was the most honest response she could have given. I walked back to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline while gathering my thoughts. When I turned back to face her, I felt calmer than I had since discovering her affair. Jessica, I want you to do something for me. I want you to imagine that you never met me. Imagine that 3 years ago, instead of meeting me at that networking event, you'd run into Ryan on the street. Imagine that the two of you had reconnected then, dated for 3 years, gotten engaged, and were planning a wedding. Mike, where are you going with this? Just stay with me. You're engaged to Ryan, planning a life with him, when suddenly I show up in your life. We have this incredible connection, this easy compatibility, this shared vision for the future. We work together brilliantly. We make each other laugh. We build something beautiful and successful and stable. I could see her starting to understand where I was headed with this thought experiment. Now imagine that you start meeting me in secret while staying engaged to Ryan. Imagine that you invite me to your wedding with him, and then kiss me behind a pillar during your reception. How do you think Ryan would react? What would you expect him to do? Jessica's face crumpled as the parallel hit home. He would leave me, she whispered. He would feel betrayed and humiliated, and he would never forgive me. Would he? Be wrong to react that way? No, she admitted. He would be absolutely right to leave. What I did to you tonight, what I've been doing for 6 months, it's unforgivable. It's not unforgivable, I said quietly. But it is something I can't get past. Not because I don't love you, because I love myself too much to accept a relationship where I'm constantly wondering if I'm enough. Constantly worrying about the next time you'll be tempted by someone who makes you feel differently than I do. Jessica sank back into the chair, her wedding dress wrinkled and stained now, far cry from the perfect vision she'd been that morning. So what happens now? Do we get divorced? Do we try counseling? Do we take some time apart to figure things out? What happens now is that you go home and think about what you really want, not what you think you should want, not what makes the most sense practically, but what you actually want. If that's a life with Ryan, then you should pursue that. If it's a life alone while you figure out who you are and what makes you happy, then you should do that. If it's somehow still a life with me, then we can talk about what that might look like. And what about you? What do you want? I considered the question carefully. Right now, I want some distance from this situation so I can think clearly. I want to figure out how to separate our business interests and our shared assets without destroying everything we've built together. I want to understand how I missed the signs that you were struggling with our relationship for so long. You didn't miss anything, she said quickly. I hid it from you because I was confused and scared and didn't know how to handle what I was feeling. Maybe else. I was so focused on building our future that I stopped paying attention to whether you were happy in our present. Maybe I assumed that because we worked well together professionally and socially, we were solid romantically. Maybe I took your love for granted and didn't notice when it started to feel uncertain or incomplete. Jessica looked surprised by this admission. Mike, you never took me for granted. You were always thoughtful and attentive and supportive. The problems in our relationship were my problems, not yours. I appreciate you saying that, but I think it's more complicated than that. Relationships don't usually fall apart because one person suddenly decides to have an affair. Usually, there are underlying issues that create vulnerability to outside attractions. Walked back to my desk and picked up the framed photo from our engagement party, studying our smiling faces one more time before placing it face down in the drawer. Maybe we were so good at being partners that we forgot how to be lovers. Maybe we were so focused on building a successful life together that we stopped nurturing. It's the emotional connection that brought us together in the first place. Does That mean you think we could fix those issues and try again? I think it means we both need to understand what went wrong before either of us can move forward, whether that's together or separately. I looked at her directly, noting how young and vulnerable she looked without her perfect makeup and elegant hairstyle. Jessica, do you remember what you said to me on our third date when I brought you soup when you had a cold? She smiled slightly through her tears. I said you were the first man who'd ever taken care of me without expecting anything in return. I said it made me feel safe in a way I'd never experienced before. And do you remember what you said about Ryan when you told me about your college relationships? Her smile faded. I said he was exciting but unreliable. I said he made me feel like I was on a roller coaster, all the time exhilarating but exhausting. So maybe the question isn't whether you love me or love him. Maybe the question is whether you're ready for a relationship based on safety and stability, or whether you need more excitement and unpredictability in your life right now. Jessica was quiet for a long time, processing what I'd said. Finally, she spoke in a voice so soft I could barely hear her. What if I don't know the answer to that question? What if I'm not sure what I need or want? Then that's your answer right there. You're not ready to be married to anyone, Jessica. Marriage requires certainty, not just about how you feel, but about what you want your life to look like. It requires choosing one person and one path, even when other options seem appealing. I stood up and walked to the door of my office, holding it open for her. Go home. Take some time to figure out who you are when you're not trying to be the perfect partner for me or recapturing the past with Ryan. Figure out what makes you happy, independent of any relationship. Then, if you decide you want to try to rebuild what we had, we can talk about whether that's possible. Jessica stood up slowly, gathering the train of her wedding dress in one hand. As she walked past me toward the door, she stopped and looked up at me with an expression of profound sadness. Mike, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but will you wait for me? Will you give me time to figure this out without immediately moving on? I considered her question carefully. I won't wait forever, Jessica. But I won't make any major decisions about my life for the next few months either. That's the best I can offer right now. She nodded, seeming to understand that it was more than she deserved under the circumstances. I love you, Mike. I know. My actions don't support that claim, but I need you to know that I do love you, even if I've done a terrible job of showing it lately. I love you too, I replied honestly. That's why this hurts so much, and that's why I need you to figure out whether love is enough to build a marriage on, or whether you need something more than love to be truly happy. After she left, I sat back down at my desk and stared out at the city lights for a long time. My phone had been buzzing intermittently with messages from friends and family, but I wasn't ready to deal with their questions and concerns yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Robert, explaining that I would need to take some time off to deal with personal issues and asking him to handle our Monday morning client meetings. As I typed, I realized that, for the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe normally again. The shock and anger were still there, but underneath them was a strange sense of clarity about what needed to happen next. I couldn't control Jessica's choices or force her to want the same things I wanted. I could control how I responded to this situation, and I could make sure that whatever decisions I made were based on self-respect and a clear understanding of my own worth. I finished the email to Robert, then opened a new document and began writing down everything I could remember about the past 6 months, looking for signs I might have missed that Jessica was struggling with our relationship. It was going to be a long night, but for the first time since I'd seen that kiss behind the stone pillars, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just reacting to circumstances beyond my control. The Monday morning, after what should have been my honeymoon, departure was surreal in its normalcy. I woke up in my Highlands loft at 6:30, made coffee using the expensive machine Jessica had insisted we needed for our kitchen renovation, and checked my phone to find 47 missed messages and 16 voicemails.
The local news ad.
Somehow gotten wind of the wedding drama. It's probably from one of the guests who'd posted about it on social media. And Channel 7 was calling for a comment about Denver's most shocking wedding scandal of the year. I deleted the voicemails without listening to them and headed to the office, where I found Robert waiting for me with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression that told me he'd already heard more than enough details about. "Saturday night? You look like hell," he said without preamble, handing me one of the cups. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I admitted, settling into my chair and noting that he'd already removed the framed photo of Jessica and me from my desk. "Thanks for handling the Brennan presentation this morning." I wasn't ready to talk about brand loyalty strategies with everything else going on. "Speaking of everything else going on," Robert said carefully, "we need to discuss how this situation might affect the business. I've already fielded 3 calls from clients asking if we're stable enough to handle their accounts long term." The reality of how my personal life was bleeding into our professional world hit me like a cold slap. Thompson Andy Chen had been built on the foundation of trust and reliability, qualities that were now being questioned because of my very public marital implosion. "What did you tell them? That you're dealing with personal matters, but that the company remains fully operational and committed to their success. But Mike, we need to get ahead of this before it spirals into something that actually damages our reputation." I nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. "What do you suggest?" "Transparency, to a point. We acknowledge that you're going through a difficult personal situation. We emphasize that it won't affect your professional capabilities or the company's operations, and we redirect the conversation to business as quickly as possible." Before I could respond, my assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Thompson, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says his name is David Reynolds, and that it's urgent." Jessica's brother was the last person I expected to see that morning, but I told her to send him in. David looked like he hadn't slept since Saturday night, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled and his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "Mike, I know you probably don't want to see anyone from my family right now, but I need to talk to you about Jessica." Robert made a move to leave, but I gestured for him to stay. Whatever David had to say, I wanted a witness, and Robert had become more than just my business partner over the years. He was one of my closest friends. "What about Jessica?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. David sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, the same chair Jessica had occupied 2 nights earlier. "She's gone. She left Denver yesterday morning, and no one knows where she went. My parents are frantic, and I'm honestly worried about her mental state." I felt a flicker of concern despite everything that had happened. "What do you mean she's gone?" "She came home Saturday night after she left here, packed 2 suitcases, and was gone by the time my mother went to check on her Sunday morning. She left a note saying she needed time to think and that she'd be in touch when she was ready, but that could mean anything." Robert leaned forward in his chair. "Did she take her car?" "No, that's what's strange. Her car is still in my parents' driveway, but there's no record of her taking a flight or renting a car. It's like she just vanished." A terrible thought occurred to me. "David, have you checked her bank accounts? Credit cards? That's the other weird thing." She withdrew $5,000 in cash from her savings account on Sunday morning, but there's been no other activity since then. No credit card charges, no ATM withdrawals, nothing. The concern I was feeling intensified into something closer to alarm. Jessica was many things, but she wasn't reckless or impulsive when it came to practical matters. The fact that she'd taken cash and then disappeared without a trace suggested she was either planning to stay off the grid for an extended period, or she was in a worse emotional state than I'd realized. "Have you filed a missing person report?" "That's complicated," David said, running his hands through his hair. "Technically, she's an adult who left voluntarily with money and a note explaining her intentions. The police won't consider her missing for at least 72 hours, and even then, they're not likely to put much effort into finding someone who clearly chose to leave." "What about Ryan?" I asked, the name leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "Have you contacted him to see if she went to San Francisco?" I tried. His phone goes straight to voicemail, and when I called his office, they said he'd taken emergency leave and wouldn't be back for at least a week. Robert and I exchanged glances. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, so they disappeared together, Robert said, voicing what we were all thinking. "That's what I'm afraid of," David admitted. "But Mike, there's something else you need to know. Something I probably should have told you months ago." Duh. The tone of his voice made my stomach clench with dread. "What is it?" Ryan didn't just randomly reach out to Jessica 6 months ago. He's been trying to reconnect with her on and off for years, ever since college. He's reached out through social media, sent letters to my parents' house, even showed up at her office a couple of times when she was working at her previous job. You're telling me he's been stalking her? Not exactly stalking, but definitely persistently pursuing contact, despite her not responding. When Jessica started dating you seriously, he seemed to back off for a while. But then he saw your engagement announcement online, and the contact attempts intensified. I felt like I was discovering a completely different version of the story. I thought I knew. Why didn't Jessica tell me any of this? Because she was embarrassed about it, and because she thought she could handle it herself. She changed her phone number twice, trying to avoid his calls. She blocked him on every social media platform. Somehow he kept finding ways to reach her. Until 6 months ago, when she finally responded. According to what she told me, he sent her a letter saying he was coming to Denver for business, and threatening to show up at your office if she didn't agree to meet him for coffee. She thought that if she gave him the closure he claimed to want, he'd finally leave her alone. Robert leaned back in his chair, processing this new information. But instead of getting closure, he convinced her to start a relationship with him. I think it's more complicated than that, David said carefully. I think Ryan has been emotionally manipulating Jessica for years. He's playing on her guilt about how their college relationship ended and her natural tendency to try to fix things. And I think Jessica, being Jessica, tried to handle the situation by herself instead of asking for help. This revelation reframed everything I thought I understood about Jessica's affair. Instead of seeing her as someone who had willingly chosen to explore a connection with an ex-boyfriend, I was starting to see her as someone who had been systematically worn down by persistent manipulation until she didn't know how to resist anymore. David, why are you telling me this now? Because I'm worried that Jessica didn't just leave town to think things through. I'm worried that Ryan convinced her to run away with him, and that she's making decisions based on emotional manipulation rather than what she actually wants. And you think I should do something about that? I think Jessica made terrible choices, but I also think she's been a victim in this situation longer than any of us realized. And I think if something happens to her because we all just assumed she was capable of handling Ryan on her own, we'll never forgive ourselves. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the Denver streets where life was continuing. Normally for everyone except the people in this room. The rational part of my brain was telling me that Jessica was an adult, who had made her choices, and would have to live with the consequences. But the part of me that had loved her for 3 years was genuinely concerned about her safety and well-being. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help me find her. You know Jessica better than anyone. You know how she thinks, where she might go when she needs to process difficult emotions. And honestly, if she is with Ryan, and if he's been manipulating her the way I think he has, you might be the only person who can convince her to come home. Robert cleared his throat. Mike, I know this is a personal decision, but from a business perspective, having this drama drag out indefinitely isn't good for the company. If you can resolve the situation quickly and definitively, it might actually be better than letting it fester in the background for months. I considered their arguments while staring out at the city. Part of me wanted to tell David that Jessica had made her choice and that I wasn't responsible for rescuing her from the consequences. But another part of me couldn't shake the image of her sitting in my office Saturday night, looking lost and confused and younger than her 28 years. Do you have any idea where they might have gone? David pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot of a social media post. Ryan posted this yesterday from his Instagram account before he apparently deleted the whole profile. The image showed a rustic cabin surrounded by pine trees with a caption that read, "Sometimes you have to get away from everything to find what really matters." The location was tagged as somewhere in Colorado, which wasn't particularly helpful given the state's vast wilderness. That could be anywhere, I said, studying the photo. Colorado has thousands of cabins that look exactly like that. True. But Jessica mentioned something to my mom a few weeks ago about a client who owned a retreat center somewhere near Estes Park. She said it was the kind of place where people went to disconnect from the world and reconnect with themselves. That's still a pretty broad area to search. I know, but it's the only lead we have. Mike, I know I'm asking a lot, and I know you have every right to tell me to handle this family crisis myself. But Jessica is my little sister, and despite everything that's happened, I know she loves you. If she's making decisions based on fear or manipulation or some misguided attempt to escape her problems, I don't want her to destroy her life because we were all too proud or angry to try to help her. I looked at Robert, who shrugged in a way that indicated he thought I should follow my instincts rather than his business advice. Then I looked back at David, seeing genuine fear and concern in his eyes rather than any attempt to manipulate me into fixing his sister's mistakes. If I agree to help you look for her, I need you to understand that I'm not doing it because I want to save our marriage. I'm doing it because I'm concerned about her safety and because no one deserves to have their life derailed by someone else's manipulation. I understand, David said quickly. Honestly, that might be exactly what Jessica needs to hear. She needs to know that people care about her well-being, independent of what it means for their own lives. I walked back to my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up a map of the Estes Park area. We'll need to narrow down the search area significantly if we're going to have any chance of finding them. Do you remember anything else Jessica said about this retreat center? She mentioned that it was owned by a woman who used to work in corporate marketing before she bought property in the mountains and started hosting wellness retreats for burned-out professionals. That detail sparked a memory. Wait, was this a potential client? Someone Jessica was pitching for a social media campaign? I think so, yes. She said the woman was interested in reaching a younger demographic, but didn't want to lose the authentic, disconnected from technology vibe that made her retreat special. I searched through my files for any correspondence about retreat centers or wellness businesses in the Estes Park area. After a few minutes, I found what I was looking for, an email thread from 2 months ago about a potential client named Sarah Mitchell who owned something called Mountain Peace Retreat. Found it, I said, pulling up the retreat's website. Photos on the homepage showed the same rustic aesthetic as Ryan's Instagram post, with cabins nestled among tall pines and promotional copy about finding clarity away from the noise of modern life. That has to be it, David said, looking at the images over my shoulder. It matches Ryan's photo exactly. I called the number listed on the website, prepared to make up some story about booking a last-minute retreat. A woman with a calm, soothing voice answered after 3 rings. Mountain Peace Retreat, this is Sarah. How can I help you find your path to wellness? Hi, Sarah. My name is Mike Thompson. I'm calling because I'm trying to reach someone who might be staying at your retreat. It's a family emergency. I'm sorry, but we have a strict privacy policy for our guests. I can't confirm or deny whether anyone is staying here. I understand your policy, but this is regarding my wife, Jessica. She left town unexpectedly, and her family is concerned about her safety. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Thompson, I remember you. Jessica showed me your marketing portfolio when she was here for our consultation. She spoke about you very fondly, so she is there. I can't discuss specific guests, but I can tell you that if someone were here who needed to receive a message from concerned family members, I would be willing to pass that message along. It was a carefully worded non-confirmation that told me everything I needed to know. Sarah, could you please tell Jessica that her brother David is worried about her and that I'm not angry, just concerned about her well-being? And could you ask her to call home so her family knows she's safe? I can certainly pass along a message of that nature to any guests who might benefit from hearing it. Thank you. And Sarah, if Jessica's there, please make sure she knows that whatever decisions she makes about her life going forward, she has people who care about her and want her to be safe and happy. That's a beautiful message. I'll make sure anyone who needs to hear it receives it. After I hung up, David looked at me with something resembling hope for the first time since he'd walked into my office. Do you think she'll call? I don't know, I said honestly. But at least now we know she's safe, and she knows that people are worried about her. Robert had been listening to the conversation with growing interest. Mike, I think you handled that perfectly, showed concern without being possessive, and you gave Jessica information without trying to control her response. The question now is what we do if she doesn't call, David said. Do we drive up there? Do we wait? Do we call the police and report that we found her? I considered the options while looking at the retreat's website. Everything about Mountain Peace Retreat suggested it was designed for people who needed space to make difficult life decisions without outside pressure. If Jessica was there, it was because she was trying to figure out what she wanted, and showing up uninvited would only add to the pressure she was already feeling. We wait, I decided. If Jessica is at the retreat, she's safe and she's received the message that people care about her. If she wants to talk, she'll call. If she doesn't, then we respect her decision to handle this situation on her own timeline. And what about Ryan? David asked. We just let him continue whatever influence he has over her. David, I know you want to protect your sister, but Jessica is going to have to figure out how to deal with Ryan herself. If he's been manipulating her for years, then the solution isn't for us to rescue her from him. The solution is for her to develop the strength and clarity to recognize manipulation when it happens and choose not to accept it. My phone rang, interrupting our conversation. The caller ID showed Jessica's number, and all three of us stared at the phone as it rang. Answer it, David whispered urgently. I picked up the phone, noting that my heart rate had increased significantly. Hello, Jessica, Mike. Her voice sounded small and tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Sarah said you called looking for me. Your family was worried. No one knew where you'd gone. I'm sorry. I should have been more specific in my note. I needed to get away from everything and think, are you okay? Are you safe? I'm safe. I'm at the retreat center I told you about, the one near Estes Park. And before you ask, yes, Ryan is here too. David gestured frantically, indicating he wanted to talk to her, but I shook my head. This conversation needed to happen between Jessica and me first. How are you feeling about everything? I asked, keeping my voice as neutral as possible. Confused, guilty, sad, angry at myself for creating this mess. She paused, and I could hear wind in the background, suggesting she was outside. Mike, David told you about Ryan's history of contacting me, didn't he? He mentioned it. Should have told you about that from the beginning. I thought I could handle it myself, and I thought that if I told you about his persistent attempts to contact me, it would create drama and tension that we didn't need. Instead, it created a situation where you felt like you had to handle his manipulation alone. There was a long silence. Is that what you think it was? Manipulation? I think Ryan has been using your guilt and your natural compassion to wear down your resistance to a relationship you didn't want. I think he's been making you feel responsible for his feelings and his choices for years. And I think that when you finally agreed to meet him for coffee, he saw it as confirmation that his persistence was working. You might be right about that, she said quietly. Being up here, away from both of you, I'm starting to see the pattern more clearly. Every time I tried to create boundaries with Ryan, he found a way to make me feel guilty for hurting him. Every time I tried to end our contact, he convinced me that I owed him closure or explanation or another chance. And how do you feel about that realization? Angry at him, but mostly at myself for not seeing it sooner and for not asking for help when I needed it. I could hear David breathing heavily beside me, clearly wanting to jump into the conversation, but I continued focusing on Jessica. What about your feelings for him? You think those were real, or do you think they were a response to his manipulation? I think... She paused, considering her words carefully. I think what I felt for Ryan was mostly nostalgia mixed with guilt. He kept reminding me of how happy we'd been in college, how perfect our relationship could have been if circumstances had been different. He made me feel like I owed him the chance to find out what we could have together. But that's not the same thing as actually wanting to be with him. No, it's not. And being here with him for the past 2 days has made that really clear. Without the excitement of secrecy and the guilt about betraying you, there's not much substance to what Ryan and I have together. We're different people than we were in college, and we don't actually want the same things from life. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by caution. Jessica, I'm glad you're gaining that clarity, but I need you to understand that this realization doesn't automatically fix what's happened between us. I know that, she said. And there was a maturity in her voice that I hadn't heard in our previous conversations. Mike, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, okay? If I had come to you 6 months ago and told you that Ryan was persistently trying to contact me and that I was struggling with feelings of guilt and confusion about our past relationship, what would you have done? The question caught me off guard, but I considered it seriously. I would have asked you what you wanted me to do to help. If you'd wanted me to contact Ryan directly and tell him to stop, I would have done that. If you'd wanted us to handle it together by changing your phone number or involving a lawyer, I would have supported that. If you'd wanted to meet with him once to give him closure with me there as support, I probably would have agreed to that too. Been angry, or jealous, or threatened? I might have felt those things, but I would have tried to focus on what you needed rather than what I was feeling. Jessica, the problem was never that you had complicated feelings about your past. The problem was that you tried to handle those complications by yourself, while maintaining the pretense that everything was fine between us. I was trying to protect you from having to deal with my problems. But that's not how marriage works. Don't protect your partner by hiding your struggles from them. Protect them by facing difficulties together so that no one has to carry the burden alone. I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. I made such a mess of everything. Yes, you did. But Jessica, making mistakes doesn't make you a terrible person. It makes you human. The question now is what you're going to do. With the clarity you're gaining about your patterns and choices, I want to come home, she said after a moment. Not to fix our marriage necessarily, but to face the consequences of my choices instead of running away from them. I want to apologize. To our families and friends, I want to figure out how to make amends for the damage I've caused. And I want to learn how to handle difficult situations honestly, instead of trying to manage everyone's feelings by myself. What about Ryan? Ryan is going to have to figure out his own life without using me as an excuse for not moving forward. I'm done being responsible for his emotional well-being. David gestured again, and this time I nodded. Jessica, David is here. He's been worried sick about you. Do you want to talk to him? Yes, please. I handed the phone to David, who immediately launched into a mixture of relief and gentle scolding that reminded me of the protective older brother he'd always been. While they talked, I thought about everything Jessica had said and tried to process my own feelings about her apparent realizations. Part of me was encouraged by the maturity and self-awareness she was showing. The Jessica I'd just spoken with sounded more honest and grounded than she had in months, possibly years. But another part of me wondered whether this clarity was genuine, growth, or just another response to a crisis that would fade once the immediate pressure was resolved. When David handed the phone back to me, Jessica's voice was stronger and more determined. Mike, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but when I come back to Denver, would you be willing to talk with me about what happened? Not about getting back together necessarily, but about understanding where our relationship went wrong so that we can both learn from it. I think that would be helpful for both of us, I said. But Jessica, I want you to come back because you're ready to face reality. Not because you think you can somehow undo what's happened. I understand. I'm not coming back to fix our marriage. I'm coming back to take responsibility for my choices and to figure out how to be a better person going forward. When are you planning to return? Tomorrow. Ryan is going back to San Francisco, and I'm driving home in the morning. After we hung up, David and I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the conversation and its implications. Robert had been taking notes throughout the call, probably thinking about how to frame this development in terms of the business impact. Do you believe her? David finally asked. Do you think she's really gained the clarity she claims to have? Or do you think this is just what she thinks? We want to hear? I think she's gained some clarity, I said carefully. But I also think she's still processing everything, and real change takes time and consistent effort. The Jessica I just talked to sounds more honest and self-aware than she has in a long time, but talk is easy when you're sitting in a peaceful retreat center. The real test will be how she handles things when she's back in the real world dealing with the actual consequences of her choices. What are you going to do when she gets back? I'm going to talk with her, like I promised. But David, I need you to understand that even if Jessica has genuinely learned from this experience, that doesn't mean our marriage is salvageable. Too much trust has been broken, and too much damage has been done for us to simply pick up where we left off. I understand that. I just want my sister to have the chance to make amends and move forward with her life, whether that's with you or on her own. Robert leaned forward in his chair. Mike, I know this is primarily a personal situation, but I think Jessica's return could actually be good for the business if it's handled right. If she comes back and takes responsibility for her actions publicly, it could demonstrate that you're both mature professionals who can handle personal difficulties without letting them destroy your work. Assuming she actually follows through on what she's saying, right? But if she does, it might even strengthen your professional reputation rather than damaging it. I looked out the window again, watching people walk purposefully down the street toward their own challenges and opportunities. In less than 24 hours, I would be face to face with Jessica again. We would have to navigate one of the most difficult conversations of our lives. I had no idea what the outcome would be, but for the first time since Saturday night, I felt like we might actually be able to have an honest discussion about what had gone wrong and what should happen next. The phone on my desk rang, interrupting my thoughts. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Thompson, I have a reporter from the Denver Post Online too, asking for a comment about your wedding situation." I looked at Robert and David, both of whom were watching to see how I would handle this latest complication. "Tell them I have no comment at this time, but that if they're interested in covering Thompson and Chen's recent business developments, I'd be happy to schedule an interview about our expansion plans." "Good call," Robert said, as I hung up. "Keep the focus on business and refuse to feed the personal drama." "That's assuming the personal drama is actually winding down," David said. "Jessica still has to come back and face everyone she disappointed. And embarrassed, that's not going to be easy for her." "No, it's not," I agreed. "But if she's serious about taking responsibility for her choices, then facing that embarrassment is part of the process. And if she's not serious about it, then we'll find out soon enough." As David prepared to leave, he turned back to me with a concerned expression. "Mike, regardless of what happens between you and Jessica, I want you to know that I consider you family, you've been good for my sister, and you've been a good friend to me. I hope that whatever decisions you both make going forward, we can maintain some kind of relationship." "I'd like that too, David. Your family welcomed me from the beginning, and that meant a lot to me. Whatever happens with Jessica and me, I don't want to lose the connections I've built with the rest of you." After David left, Robert and I spent the rest of the morning reviewing our client accounts and making sure that any potential fallout from my personal situation was contained. By noon, we had a plan for handling media inquiries, reassuring clients, and maintaining business continuity regardless of what drama might unfold in my personal life. As I prepared to leave the office for lunch, I realized that I felt more in control of the situation than I had since Saturday night. I still didn't know what the future held for Jessica and me, but I knew that I was handling the crisis with integrity and self-respect. Whatever came next, I would be able to live with the choices I was making. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult conversations. But today had proven that I was capable of navigating this crisis without losing my sense of who I was or what I stood for. That realization was worth more than any marriage that required me to compromise my fundamental values or accept behavior that violated my basic need for honesty and trust. Jessica arrived at my office Tuesday afternoon looking nothing like the confident woman who had walked down the aisle 4 days earlier. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweater instead of her usual polished business attire. And there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well at the retreat.
Yeah, but there was something
Different in her posture, a straightness to her shoulders that hadn't been there during our previous conversations. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said as she settled into the chair across from my desk. "I know you didn't have to. We both need to understand what happened if we're going to move forward constructively," I replied, noting that she seemed calmer than I'd expected. "How was your drive back from Estes Park?" "Long. Gave me a lot of time to think." She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture I recognized as something she did when she was nervous but trying to appear composed. "Mike, I need to start by apologizing not just for what I did, but for how I did it. I've spent the last few days really examining my behavior over the past 6 months. I'm horrified by how manipulative and deceptive I was." "Tell me what you mean by that?" "I convinced myself that I was protecting you by hiding my contact with Ryan. But really I was protecting myself from having to make a difficult choice. I told myself that meeting him for coffee was about giving him closure. But really, it was about satisfying my own curiosity about what might have been." I pretended that my feelings for him were something that just happened to me, but really, I made dozens of small choices that led to developing those feelings. She paused, looking directly at me with an expression of genuine regret. Most importantly, I let you plan and pay for a wedding while I was emotionally involved with another man? That was unconscionably selfish, and I can't imagine how betrayed you must feel. Her words were exactly what I'd needed to hear. Ah! But I found myself studying her face carefully, looking for signs that this was another performance designed to achieve a specific outcome.
Oh.
Jessica, what you're saying sounds like real insight. But I have to ask, how do I know this isn't just what you think I want to hear? You don't, she said simply. Honestly, I'm not even sure myself sometimes. I've been so focused on managing other people's perceptions for so long that it's hard to know when I'm being genuinely honest versus when I'm unconsciously trying to manipulate a situation. The admission was so unexpected and vulnerable that I felt some of my defensive walls beginning to lower. It's actually the most honest thing you've said to me in months. It's the most honest thing I've said to anyone in months. Mike, I think I've been living in a kind of performance for years, always trying to be the perfect girlfriend, the perfect business partner, the perfect daughter. And when Ryan started contacting me, part of what appealed to me was that he remembered a version of myself that existed before I became so concerned with being perfect for everyone else. So your attraction to him was really about missing an earlier version of yourself? Partly, yes. But also about the excitement of having a secret, of doing something that was just for me without having to consider how it would affect anyone else, which is incredibly selfish when I say it out loud. I leaned back in my chair, processing this perspective on her affair. Jessica, did you ever consider that you could have explored those feelings about yourself and your life without involving Ryan? Did you ever think about talking to me about feeling constrained or unfulfilled in some way? She was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. Honestly, no, I didn't. And I think that's because I was afraid that if I told you I was struggling with our relationship, you might decide I wasn't worth the effort of working through those struggles. So instead, you decided to explore your struggles by having an affair. Instead, I decided to have the affair first and figure out my feelings afterward, which was backwards and destructive and unfair to everyone involved. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline while I processed what she was telling me. Her analysis of her own behavior was more insightful than anything she'd said during our previous conversations. Sure what it meant for our future? Jessica, let's say I believe that you've gained genuine insight into your patterns and motivations. Let's say I believe that you're committed to changing those patterns going forward. The question I'm struggling with is whether that's enough to rebuild a relationship that's been so fundamentally damaged. I don't think it is enough, she said quietly. Mike, I've been thinking about our relationship a lot over the past few days, trying to understand not just what I did wrong, but what was wrong with us that made my choices possible. This was not the direction I'd expected the conversation to take. What do you mean? I mean that healthy relationships don't usually create the conditions where one person feels compelled to have a secret affair for 6 months. I'm not saying that justifies what I did, but I think there were problems in our relationship that we were both ignoring. Such as, she turned in her chair to face me directly. We were so good at being business partners and life partners that we stopped being romantic partners. When was the last time we had a conversation about our hopes and dreams that wasn't related to the agency or our wedding plans? When was the last time we had physical intimacy that felt spontaneous rather than scheduled? When was the last time either of us said something that surprised the other person? Her questions hit uncomfortably close to home. I thought back over the past year of our relationship, trying to remember moments of genuine emotional connection that weren't related to achieving mutual goals. We became roommates who ran a business together and happened to be engaged, she continued. We were incredibly compatible and successful, but we weren't really in love anymore. We were in a habit that worked well for both of us. You think? That justifies having an affair. No, I think it explains why I was vulnerable to Ryan's manipulation, and why I convinced myself that exploring my feelings for him was worth risking what we had together. If I'd been truly deeply happy in our relationship, his persistent contact wouldn't have affected me the way it did. I returned to my chair, feeling like this conversation was moving into territory I hadn't anticipated. So what are you saying? That our entire relationship was a mistake? I'm saying that we built something really valuable together. But it wasn't the kind of passionate, all-consuming love that survives major challenges. It was a partnership based on compatibility and shared goals. And when that partnership was tested by outside pressure, it didn't have the emotional foundation to withstand the test. Jessica, if you believe that, then why are you here? What's the point of this conversation? Because I want us both to understand what happened so we can make informed decisions about what comes next. And because I owe you a complete apology, not just for the affair, but for letting our relationship drift into something less than what we both deserved. I studied her face, seeing a level of self-awareness that was both impressive and heartbreaking. What kind of decisions are you talking about? I think we should get divorced, Mike, not because I don't love you, but because I love you enough to want you to find someone who can give you the kind of relationship you deserve. And because I need to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be the perfect partner for someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though they echoed thoughts I'd been having myself. Hearing Jessica say them out loud made the end of our marriage feel suddenly, irrevocably real. You're sure that's what you want? Mike, you deserve to be with someone who chooses you completely and enthusiastically every single day. Not their practical choice. Not their practical choice. Not their practical choice. And I need to learn how to be happy with myself before I can be a good partner to anyone. The rational part of my brain knew she was right, but the emotional part was grieving the loss of the future we'd planned together. What about the agency? What about all the practical things we've built together? Been thinking about that too. I think you should buy out my share of the agency. It's always been more your vision than mine, and you're the one with the real expertise in strategy and client relations. I want to go back to school, maybe get a degree in counseling or social work. I want to do something that helps people instead of just selling them things. Jessica, are you sure you're not making these decisions too quickly? A few days ago, you were trying to convince me to work through our problems, and now you're talking about completely restructuring your life. I know it seems sudden, but I think I've been avoiding these realizations for a long time. Being forced to really examine my choices and motivations has clarified things that I've been refusing to see. And what about Ryan? Where does he fit into your new life plan? He doesn't. I ended things with Ryan yesterday before I left the retreat. I told him that I was done being responsible for his feelings and that any future contact from him would be unwelcome. I also told him that if he continues to pursue me or shows up in Denver uninvited, I'll file a restraining order. How did he react to that? Not well. He accused me of leading him on and wasting years of his life. Said I was making a mistake by choosing you over him. And when I explained that I wasn't choosing you either, he got angry and told me I'd regret throwing away my chance at real love. That must have been difficult. It was, but it also confirmed that I was making the right decision. The Ryan I remembered from college was sweet and romantic and spontaneous. The Ryan I've been dealing with for the past 6 months is manipulative and persistent and unable to accept that other people have the right to make choices he doesn't like. Do you think he'll respect your boundaries going forward? I honestly don't know. But I'm prepared to involve law enforcement if necessary. I'm done being afraid to set firm boundaries because I'm worried about hurting someone's feelings. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of what had been said. Finally, Jessica spoke again. Mike, I have one more thing I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago. What is it?
Never.
Wanted to get married. Not to you, not to anyone. I agreed to marry you because it seemed like the natural next step in our relationship, and because I thought it was what you wanted, because I was afraid that if I said I wasn't ready, you'd end our relationship. This revelation was somehow more shocking than learning about the affair. You never wanted to get married. I loved being with you. I loved our life together. I loved building the agency with you. But the idea of marriage always felt overwhelming and confining to me. I kept hoping that my feelings would change, that I'd start to feel excited about being your wife instead of anxious about it. Jessica, why didn't you tell me this before we got engaged? Because I was afraid you'd think I didn't love you enough. And because I thought that if I went through with the engagement and wedding planning, I'd eventually start to feel differently about marriage itself. But you didn't. No, I didn't. If anything, The wedding planning made me feel more trapped and anxious. And I think that emotional state made me more vulnerable to Ryan's manipulation. Because he represented an escape from commitments I wasn't sure I wanted to make, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: anger at being deceived about something so fundamental, relief at finally understanding the source of tension I'd sensed but couldn't identify, and sadness at realizing how much pain could have been avoided. If we'd been honest with each other from the beginning, Jessica, do you realize that if you'd told me you weren't ready for marriage, I would have been willing to wait? Or to discuss alternative ways of structuring our relationship that didn't involve legal marriage? I realize that now, but at the time I was so afraid of disappointing you that I convinced myself I could force myself to want what I thought you wanted. And instead, you ended up disappointing both of us in a much more devastating way. Yes, Mike, I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I want you to know that every choice I made that hurt you was about my own fears and insecurities, not about any shortcomings on your part. You were an amazing partner, and you deserved honesty from me that I was too afraid to give. I appreciate you saying that, but I have to take some responsibility too. I was so focused on achieving the relationship milestones I thought we were supposed to achieve that I didn't pay enough attention to whether you were genuinely excited about those milestones. You shouldn't have had to guess about my feelings. I should have been honest with you instead of trying to manage the situation by myself. We should have been honest with each other about a lot of things. Jessica nodded, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. Mike, despite everything that's happened, I want you to know that our relationship meant everything to me. You taught me what it felt like to be truly supported and valued by someone. You showed me what a healthy partnership could look like. And even though I wasn't able to be the partner you deserved, being with you made me a better person. You meant a lot to me too, Jessica. I loved the life we built together, and I loved who I was when I was with you. I'm sorry that we couldn't find a way to have the conversations we needed to have before everything fell apart. What happens now? Now we figure out how to untangle our lives in a way that's fair to both of us. We talk to lawyers about the divorce. We work out the business arrangements. We figure out how to explain the situation to our families and friends. And after that, we both get to start over. You get to figure out who you are. When you're not trying to be perfect for someone else, I get to figure out how to build a relationship with someone who actually wants the same things I want. Do you think we can be friends eventually? After some time has passed and we've both moved on, I considered the question carefully. I think we can be friendly. I think we can care about each other's well-being and celebrate each other's successes. But I don't think we can be close friends, because too much has happened for us to have that kind of easy intimacy again. I understand. That's probably healthier anyway. Jessica, I have one last question for you. If you could go back to 6 months ago, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently? I would have told you immediately about Ryan's attempts to contact me. I would have been honest about my reservations about marriage. I would have suggested that we take a break from wedding planning to work on our relationship. And I would have gotten counseling to help me understand why I was so afraid of honest communication. And if I had reacted badly to any of those conversations, then I would have known that our relationship wasn't strong enough to survive. Difficult conversations, and we could have ended things before anyone got hurt the way we've been hurt. That would have been painful, but it would have been a lot less devastating than what actually happened. Yes, Mike, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but I hope that someday you'll be able to forgive me. Not for my sake, but for yours. I don't want the anger and hurt from our relationship to poison your ability to trust someone else in the future. I'm working on that. It's going to take time, but I don't want to carry this pain around forever either. Gus. Jessica stood up slowly, smoothing down her sweater in a gesture that reminded me of countless other conversations we'd had in this office. I'll have my lawyer contact yours about the divorce proceedings. And I'll put together a proposal for you to buy out my share of the agency. Take care of yourself, Jessica. And for what it's worth, I think the decisions you're making about your future sound healthy and thoughtful. Thank you. It means more than you know. She walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. Mike, I know this sounds strange given everything that's happened, but I'm proud of how you handled this situation. You could have been vindictive or cruel, but you chose to be dignified and fair. That takes a lot of strength. I had good teachers, I said, thinking about my parents and their marriage of 35 years. They showed me that how you handle the difficult times says more about your character than how you handle the good times. After Jessica left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, processing the conversation and its implications. For the first time since Saturday night, I felt like I had a clear understanding of what had happened and why. Jessica's affair hadn't been about me not being enough for her. It had been about her not knowing what she wanted and being too afraid to figure it out honestly. The knowledge didn't make the betrayal hurt less, but it did make it make sense. In a way that would allow me to move forward without constantly questioning my own worth or desirability as a partner. My phone buzzed with a text message from Robert. How did it go? I typed back, better than expected. We're getting divorced, but we're doing it like adults. I'll fill you in tomorrow. You need anything tonight? Just some time to process? Everything, but I'm okay. For the first time in 4 days, I actually meant it. I was okay. I was hurt and disappointed and grieving the future I'd thought I was going to have, but I was okay. I had handled an impossible situation with integrity and self-respect, and I was going to come out of it as a stronger, wiser person. The sun was setting over the Denver skyline, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple that reminded me why I had fallen in love with the city in the first place. Tomorrow I would start the practical work of rebuilding my life as a single person, but tonight I was going to go home to my loft, order takeout from my favorite restaurant, and watch something mindless on television. The first time in months, I was looking forward to spending an evening alone with my own thoughts, without having to worry about managing someone else's feelings or trying to solve problems that weren't really mine to solve. It felt like the beginning of something new, even though it was also the end of something I'd valued deeply. As I gathered my things to leave the office, I realized that despite everything that had happened, I was grateful for the conversation Jessica and I had just had. It had given us both the closure we needed to move forward constructively. And it had shown me that it was possible to end a relationship with honesty and mutual respect, even after significant betrayal and hurt. That realization would serve me well in whatever came next. 6 months later, I stood in the same Mountain View resort where my marriage had ended before it truly began. But this time, I was here for David and Amanda's engagement party. Life had come full circle in the most unexpected way. Watching Jessica's brother propose to her former maid of honor in the exact spot where I discovered my wife's betrayal, the divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, swift and surprisingly amicable once we'd both committed to handling it with dignity. Jessica had moved to Boulder to start her graduate program in social work, and I'd heard through David that she was thriving in her new environment. She'd been true to her word about cutting contact with Ryan, who had apparently moved back to California permanently after one final unsuccessful attempt to reach her through her workplace. Thompson and Chen had not only survived the scandal, but had grown stronger because of how we'd handled it. Our transparent, professional response to personal crisis had actually enhanced our reputation among clients who valued integrity over perfection. Robert and I had hired 2 new strategists and opened the Boulder office Jessica had originally suggested, though for very different reasons than we'd initially planned. You know, David said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne, I never thought I'd see you back here voluntarily. I never thought I'd want to come back, I admitted, accepting the drink. But it turns out that sometimes the best way to heal from a bad memory is to create a good one in the same place. Amanda approached us, radiant in a way that reminded me why David had fallen for her in the first place. She'd been devastated by her role in keeping Jessica's secret, but her genuine remorse and commitment to honesty going forward had earned my forgiveness months ago. Mike, I'm so glad you could be here, she said, giving me a warm hug. Yes. It means everything to David that you're still part of the family. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, and I meant it. David had become one of my closest friends through the aftermath of my marriage, proving that some relationships can survive even the most difficult circumstances when they're built on genuine care and respect. The party was smaller than my wedding had been, filled with people who knew the full story of what had happened here and had chosen to celebrate love anyway. There was something beautiful about that, about the way happiness could bloom in the same soil where heartbreak had once taken root. Any regrets? David asked as we watched Amanda dance with her father. About divorcing Jessica? Oh, about how? Everything happened? Sometimes. But I think we all learned something important. About the difference between settling for compatibility and holding out for genuine connection. Speaking of which, David said with a grin, "There's someone here I'd like you to meet." Before I could protest, he was leading me across the dance floor toward a woman I'd noticed earlier but hadn't had the chance to speak with. She had short auburn hair and kind eyes. And she was laughing at something one of the other guests had said with a genuineness that immediately caught my attention. "Mike, this is Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah, meet Mike Thompson, the best man who helped me realize that Amanda was the love of my life." Sarah extended her hand with a smile that reached her eyes. "The Mike Thompson who runs the marketing agency? Heard wonderful things about your work, and you're the Sarah Mitchell who owns the retreat center where my ex-wife had her revelation about wanting a divorce." I replied, shaking her hand and noting that she didn't flinch at the direct reference. To my recent past, guilty as charged, though I prefer to think of it as the place where she found the courage to be honest about what she really wanted. That's a much more positive way to frame it. I've found that most life changes that seem devastating in the moment end up being exactly what we needed, even if we couldn't see it at the time. David excused himself with a not-so-subtle wink, leaving Sarah and me to continue our conversation. We talked easily about her retreat center, my work with the agency, and our shared belief that the mountains had a way of providing clarity that city life often obscured. "Would you like to dance?" I asked when the band started playing something slow and romantic. "I'd like that very much." As we moved on to the dance floor, I realized that this was the first time in months that I'd felt genuinely excited about getting to know someone new. Not because I was trying to prove something or fill a void, but because Sarah seemed like someone worth knowing for her own sake. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we swayed to the music. "Of course. Are you ready for this? Dating again?" I mean, because I've learned that there's a difference between being over someone and being ready for someone new. Her directness was refreshing. I think I am. The honest answer is that I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago, and I think that's a good thing. I've learned to value authenticity over compatibility, and I've learned that I'd rather be alone than settle for a relationship that doesn't challenge me to be my best self. That's a beautiful way to put it. What about you? Are you ready for whatever this might be? I think so. I spent the last few years focusing on building something meaningful with my retreat center, learning to be happy on my own terms. But I'm open to sharing that happiness with the right person. As the song ended, I realized that I was smiling in a way I hadn't smiled in a very long time. Not the careful, measured smile I'd perfected for client meetings and social obligations, but the unconscious smile that comes from genuine contentment. "Sarah, would you like to have dinner sometime? Somewhere that doesn't involve wellness retreats or mountain epiphanies? Just good food and conversation?" I'd love that. Though I should warn you, I'm probably going to ask you a lot of questions about your marketing strategies. I'm thinking about expanding the retreat center, and I could use some professional guidance. I should warn you that I'm probably going to ask you a lot of questions about what you've learned from helping people figure out what they really want from life. Sounds like we'll have plenty to talk about. As the evening wound down, I found myself standing on the same terrace where my marriage had imploded. But instead of feeling haunted by the memory, I felt grateful for the journey that had brought me to this moment. Jessica had been right when she said I deserved someone who would choose me completely and enthusiastically every day. What she hadn't mentioned was that I also deserved to be someone who was ready to make that same choice. In return, walking Sarah to her car, I felt a sense of possibility that I hadn't experienced in years. Not the desperate hope of someone trying to recreate what they'd lost, but the quiet confidence of someone who had learned from their mistakes and was ready to build something new and better. "Thank you for a lovely evening," Sarah said as we reached her car. "Thank you for being brave enough to talk to someone with my complicated history." Mike, we all have complicated histories. The question is whether we've learned from them or whether we're doomed to repeat them. As I watched her drive away, I thought about how much my life had changed since that devastating night 6 months ago. I had lost a marriage, but I'd gained self-respect. I'd lost the future I'd planned, but I'd opened myself up to possibilities I'd never imagined. Most importantly, I'd learned the difference between loving someone and settling for someone, between being chosen and being truly wanted. The mountains stood silhouetted against the starlit sky, as permanent and unchanging as they'd been on my wedding night, a reminder that some things endure while others transform. I was no longer the man who had stood in this same spot watching his world collapse. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone ready for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.